All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the only coast to coast radio show all about the information economy. It's Inside Analysis. Yours truly, Eric Kavanagh here. And folks, we're going to be talking about something that affects basically everyone, anyone who uses the interwebs, and that's basically anyone these days. And not just people, but remember, systems use the internet. All sorts of enterprise applications are using the internet. We have large language models now that are hosted that we ping from our corporate environment to learn things. We have this new concept, or relatively new, of the Model Context Protocol. Well, what does all this mean for you, for your business? Let's think about this for a second. Security is everywhere these days. And it's interesting because if you look at the evolution of our industry, what did we see a number of years ago, 15 years ago? DevOps came along and really revolutionized how code is built for enterprises. You connected developers with the operations people. Guess what? Those are the people who need the benefit of the developers. So we kind of changed that. It used to be business versus IT, and then DevOps came along, and now there's a third group. And I think it really helped sort of manage some of the traditional friction around the business IT divide. And now developers are really on the front lines working with people. Well, then what happened shortly after that? It's DevSecOps. Well, what's the sec? The sec is security. Because now, if you go through the network to get everything on your network is connected to the interwebs, and you've got Workday, maybe you've got all sorts of hosted solutions out there. And then, of course, a number of years ago, COVID came along. And guess what? Everyone had to figure out how to deal with work from home. Well, what's a big part of that is getting actual provisioning of network capacity, being able to protect people at endpoints, the remote endpoints where everyone's working from home. So I'm telling this background to set up our friend here, Chris McHenry, who's waiting in the wings. He's the chief product officer for a very cool company called Aviatrix. And that word means a female pilot, by the way, in case you were wondering. And Aviatrix is like an aviator, but it's a lady aviator. And it's a very cool technology that was focused really on networking and providing industrial grade networking. And now, guess what? You want that to be secure. So, network security is a big part of it, governance. And goodness gracious, do we need some of that? Especially as we're, again, pinging all these different systems. You have these incredibly heterogeneous environments now and all sorts of touch points. And anyone knows that if you have many, many links in the chain, just one breaking link is going to cause you some trouble, or one compromised link. So with that, let's bring in Chris McHenry of Aviatrix. Welcome to Inside Analysis. Tell us a bit about what's the latest at Aviatrix. What are you working on now, and what's driving all that?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Really good to be here, and I love my job, so I think it's always easy and exciting to talk about it. But you nailed it. I think I take a perspective that may even be a little bit more aggressive, which is why does the network even exist in the first place?
Ooh,
Enterprise networks, to be
yeah.
very specific, and say it's largely because of security. It's because you don't want the internet to be your network. That's the thing that we're fundamentally was walking around RSA last week and looking at all of the amazing technologies there, probably a $500 billion market in cybersecurity. Every single one of those things is there just to protect enterprises from the internet, which is
Yeah.
fundamentally an enterprise networking problem, right? It's how do I go to that lowest layer and make sure there's demarcations and controls and observability, compliance, all of that kind of stuff. So we've been on a journey as a company for, we're about 10 years old now. You cannot be great at network security unless you are first great at networking. So we
Mm.
built the foundation, but over the last 3 years, we've really, really been investing in making sure we have the best network security solution for the cloud. And when I say the cloud, I mean specifically AWS, Azure, Google, Oracle, those public clouds that many enterprises are moving their critical workloads and applications to.
Hmm.
And the thing that gets me up every morning is that I see way too many enterprises in my day-to-day job that have little to no understanding or control over what goes in and out of their cloud environments. And
Mm.
so our cloud firewall product that we launched 2 years ago, and then our as a service offering that we launched last fall, and then some of our AI integrations that we've launched over the last several months are really designed to think about how do I serve the cloud environments so that you can overcome the challenges of using traditional tooling and traditional solutions, and ultimately improve your network security posture, that foundational layer that powers all of the cybersecurity industry.
Hmm. Yeah, and then things keep evolving here. I referenced MCP at the top of the hour, Model Context Protocol. I don't think I've seen something take off as fast as that. I mean, I heard about it maybe, I don't know, 2, 3 months ago, and now there must be 30 different vendors who are putting out their Model Context Protocol server, which is a very interesting tool. I mean, I think in many ways it's kind of a missing link, especially with respect to large language models, because LLMs we go to get research, to kind of understand topics. I always explain to people those are consensus engines. They will give you the average of what they've seen on a particular topic. So it's very useful in that context. But then with MCP, it's kind of like I describe it as a multi-layered API, or an API with a lot of stuff in it, some function calls, some ability to do things on the client side. So you can let the large language model talk to your data, ask, hit your knowledge graph, for example, to get more context to give you a better answer. And that's great, but you got to be careful about what goes up into the LLM. And then, of course, pay attention to what comes back. And that gets back into network security, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. Obviously, the AI landscape is evolving incredibly quickly. MCP is just one example, but I think you could look at multiple markers over the last 2 to 3 years where AI has, it's like it's in its infancy phase where it's
Mm.
changing, and you had a 2-year-old, and now you get a 3-year-old, and now you get a 5-year-old, and they're all different, right? So we're constantly looking at how can we enable and empower organizations to use these tools because they are incredibly powerful. But if I take a step back and look at the macro trend here, couple things. First off, these are just different kinds of applications, right? And as I think about enterprises and enterprise applications and that migration that they're moving to the cloud, one of the fundamental transitions is that we don't host all of our applications anymore. We're using services from other companies that used to be like what we would consider an east-west connection, an
Hmm.
inter-application connection. Like you got that web, that app, database server. You had your Oracle server that was sitting inside of your data center. That's where all of your, most sensitive data is. Now that's in Snowflake, right? Is that yours?
Hmm.
Is it Snowflake's? Is that an internal connection? Is it a third-party connection? It's almost like the internet is becoming people's networks. Like the application architecture fundamentally changes, and MCP is really just another example of that, right? We're creating this link between our private data and these public services that we may or may not trust, right?
Right.
But it's application architecture. And so the ability to implement security at a network layer, because I can tell you the MCP protocol has almost no security built into it right now. Like cybersecurity teams need compensating controls that
Mm.
allow them to get visibility and control into whatever new application architecture our enterprises are looking at deploying. Like, I don't want to be a roadblock. I want to empower, but I want to empower in a way that is responsible and secure for the organizations. And you don't necessarily see that because there's this tension. There's a fundamental tension, and I'm maybe a little bit cynical. You actually brought this up at the beginning, which I love, is it used to be IT versus the business, right?
Right.
It's a very
Right.
insightful comment. I see my version of this is I see a power struggle between the app teams and InfoSec,
Mm.
that has really driven a lot of enterprise architecture. In fact, I think to some extent, cloud was accelerated because the app teams could move faster because they could
Hmm.
self-serve. Why could they move faster? It
Interesting.
wasn't the tech, like it was cyber and compliance and all these things that were slowing them down on-prem. So
Interesting.
yeah. So we need to be able to we really need to reimagine, because cybersecurity is behind. We need to reimagine how those foundational controls, like the network security stuff, integrates into the DevSecOps model, whether that's MCP, whether that is, database as a service, more traditional kind of PaaS offerings, whether that's, storage, like the original cloud service with S3. All of those things are a reflection of the evolving application architectures, and we need to be able to apply security evenly across all of them.
Yeah, those are all excellent points, and you're reminding me of something else that's been sitting in my brain for years now, and that is alignment around functions and deliverables. You have these different groups. You were talking about it in the organization. You have InfoSec, you've got the application teams, you've got the database people, you've got secure, like different groups. And I've always wondered to myself, risk management, governance, and security are three Ps in a pod, it seems
Yeah.
to me. And if you get right down to things like usage, observability, well, where did observability come from? My theory is that Kubernetes just kicked off a revolution in enterprise IT because all of a sudden you have this way to distribute compute, federate compute, and get very lean about that, only scale up and scale down, which was tremendously valuable. You want to talk about saving time, money, resource, compute, even storage. If you get a good Kubernetes architecture, of course, it's funny, Alex Gallego of Red Panda. I had him on the show a few weeks ago, and we were joking about Gen AI, and he goes, "Oh, as soon as we get as soon as we get AGI, hopefully the first question they'll ask is how does Kubernetes work?" which I
Yeah,
thought was
right. I know.
which I thought was pretty funny. But like
Yeah.
all of a sudden, you have all this stuff to keep tabs on, and that's great, but it's also a bit of a stressor. But then Gen AI can actually help with some of that. I mean, it's weird what a sort of circular vortex we're in right now in terms of the innovation flywheel and what's happening. You got to stay on top of that stuff. But I think you do that by getting back to first principles and realizing that
Yes.
risk, governance, security, these are all part and parcel to the same idea, which is to protect what we have and to leverage it responsibly. And that really gets down these days to cloud network security, right?
Yeah, I don't, and I think the key here is I don't think people should be, they don't have to be in opposition to each other. In fact, I
Right.
think that's a lot
Right.
of the opportunity for
Right.
innovation in this
That's
space is
funny.
how can I bring teams together? Well, our mission as a company is actually to bring literally bring cloud networking and security teams together, right?
Wow.
When I look at our cloud firewall product, the way that I think about it is I want it to be something that cloud and app teams and security teams all love, right? And
Hmm.
so there's an element of Gen AI, super interesting, especially from an observability perspective. I love the how does Kubernetes work? Kubernetes has also created a ton of problems in network security, right?
Right.
What
Right.
used to be
Right.
a relatively static environment. Okay, let's just pretend I don't want, I mean, because by the way, I see some of this stuff, right? You've got an administrator and they're a DBA, and they've got a jump host in the same VPC or the same network that their DB
Right.
is in, and all of a sudden they're like going out to Facebook or checking their email or something. No, like that's terrible, right? And but I can start to control things because the database was a physical server. It had an IP address. I can put those rules in my firewall. I know what the jump server is. I can put those rules in my firewall. It's not going to change. IP address is relatively static. Now I have a Kubernetes cluster where the IPs are incredibly dynamic. They're scaling up, they're scaling. How do I create a policy that says the databases are not allowed to access X, Y, and Z, but this other service is? You can't. You lose a ton of network visibility, a ton of network observability, a ton of security visibility, right? And control. And so we actually, I mean, understanding cloud is one of, I think, our unique differentiators. I think the reason many organizations lost fundamental control of network security in the cloud is because the cloud, the typical network security vendors, the Palos, the Fortinets, didn't reinvent their products from the ground up
Mm,
to be something that the app teams, the cloud teams, and the security teams all love.
that's
Just
interesting.
one example of that is the Kubernetes firewall that we launched last fall, which allows you to use Kubernetes tags and attributes to create granular firewall network security policy and to do that
Interesting.
at the speed of Kubernetes, right? Again, one example, we know cloud. How do you reinvent network security for cloud? Meet the devs, meet the platform teams where they're at, and create the best firewall for Kubernetes, right? One example.
You know what? And I'm always trying to think of these metaphors to help non-technical people kind of wrap their heads around what's happening. And what you just described, I think there's an interesting analogy to high frequency trading on Wall
Yeah.
Street. because all of a sudden you've got this stuff's just flying around. Look, your old policies are not going to cut it. Like, you cannot manage that environment if you don't understand what's happening. And in order to get to the root of it, as you suggest, you have to re-architect and go down to the
Yep,
foundational level to understand it. And you're very clever to pick up on those tags in Kubernetes. Like, okay, so now we'll have observability into what's happening, what's spinning out of this cluster, and now we can start tracking and monitoring and understanding it, and then clamping it down if we need to, right?
exactly. Yep, exactly. Yeah, that's the principle. It's not, and that's just one piece of it, right? Like, we need to be able to transition, policy to be able to be written based on identity attributes.
Mm,
Super common, right? Zscaler, that's the whole ZTNA thing. But guess what? A workload is not an HR user. It's not a contractor.
right,
It's, what namespace am I a part of, right?
right,
It's a different source.
right.
And it's not just, the other piece is shift left. So at KubeCon a couple of weeks ago, we announced integration with the Kubernetes. We announced the ability to have the Kubernetes admin, or even the app admin, manage their firewall policy from their Kubernetes deployment YAML files.
Hmm.
Right. So again, shifting left. So I'm empowering the developers and the app teams, shifting network security left. When we think about shifting security left, it's oftentimes like, oh, it's container image scanning, and I'm going to do, I'm going to have all these guardrails on compliance in terms of what you're allowed to provision, what you're not allowed to provision. But like, network security has not shifted left. We're talking about a foundational layer of the stack that needs to shift left. And we launched our configuration for Aviatrix Cloud Firewall from Kubernetes at KubeCon a month ago, all in line with that vision of how do I shift network
Mhm.
security left, so that we're empowering the devs and the security team simultaneously.
Yeah, that's very, very clever, and it shows a deep awareness of what's happening here. Because if you don't get deep enough, you're just not going to catch things. You're not going to
Yep,
be able to see what's happening. You can't manage what you can't measure or see. I mean,
absolutely.
they're talking about vibe coding, which I think is an interesting
Yeah,
concept,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I kind of get it. But to like just code without looking at the code, I mean, I all right, I kind of see where that's going. But be careful, man, like, because
yeah, yeah, dude.
the
I know.
you,
Yeah,
and there's such a rush to leverage these new technologies, and there's tremendous pressure now on teams to roll that stuff out. But I keep telling people, be careful. And rule number one is get your data house in order, but then separately get your security program in order and make sure that it is as bulletproof as it can be, knowing it'll never be bulletproof, but you got to be at least able to track the minnows that are swimming around and could be entering your network. Well, folks, don't touch that. That'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, Eric Kavanagh talking to Chris McHenry of Aviatrix. We're talking about fundamentals of using the interwebs and cloud network security, how important it is. And the problem with security is that, as my old business partner used to say, something like, "There's one person who runs security in the enterprise, and his name is Scapegoat." That's the way it used to be. It can't be that way anymore, folks. You can't just have it rely on one person. You need a framework, you need policies, you need an understanding of what's out there. And AI, of course, is all the rage. Everybody's trying to learn how to use AI, and the more clever vendors are weaving it into their architectures, whether it's Gen AI to explain things or old-fashioned machine learning to optimize certain processes. The large language models are great, but they're very unwieldy. And that's part of the challenge of dealing with them, is that, I mean, honest to God, even the smartest people in the world who design them don't really know entirely how they work. We're all still kind of figuring that out. But old-fashioned machine learning is still very, very powerful. It can optimize very specific tasks. Like, it can learn from things. It can learn from environmental factors. So weaving that stuff into your products, that's the magic. Chris, I'll throw it over to you. I'm guessing you guys have been trying to focus on that yourselves, right?
yeah, absolutely. So I mean, I think you mentioned MCP earlier, and some of the transitions of how AI is changing. There's a lot of forcing functions where organizations are adopting AI. So there's interesting new threats that are part of that. But I really am maybe a little bit more of an optimist here. And I think there's a huge opportunity for us to empower security teams with AI in products, right? I mean, there's a lot of processes that have been inefficient or required multiple stakeholders in order to ultimately change. So like, think about the workflow of a policy change, right? Somebody needs a policy change, they submit a ticket, they evaluate that ticket against their person evaluates the tickets against those policies and then decides whether they need to make the change. Those are really interesting opportunities for implementing AI. There's even more basic things where you're kind of connecting two different teams together. So I'll give you an example. We at Aviatrix, my goal is to infuse the user experience with AI. And that is looking at every process, every workflow, every insight that we can collect that may or may not have been available beforehand. And one of those things is actually, how can AI analyze things in our domain, like network traffic, understanding threats in your context this time, right?
Right.
So like, maybe an S3 bucket is totally fine to access. Like, it's not going to come as a bad reputation from any of the reputation services. It's a legitimate S3 bucket, but maybe that S3 bucket is a development bucket and you're coming from a production application. That's a violation of policy, right? I mean, we can be able to analyze traffic in ways that we've never been able to do beforehand, but ultimately it's empowering the security teams to get better context, to get better, to make better decisions, to accelerate workflows, and to let security do its thing and get its value for the organization while getting out of the way of everybody else. So I think there's huge opportunity in AI to infuse it in products. And the reason that's actually really important is because you mentioned earlier that the LLMs are generalists, right? MCP helps make them more specialized. Well, our specialty as an organization is in networking and network security. So I can make that LLM do something for my domain because I'm a domain expert that it can't do as a generalist. And that's how we deliver those magical experiences that ultimately help people improve their security posture.
Yeah, and you brought up something that is another one of my platform subjects to discuss, because I'm always trying to think about where we came from and where we're going and what the future is going to look like. And I'm pretty sure I know I predicted this a couple years ago now, and I'm starting to see it more and more and more. AI and traditional machine learning combined, I think, are going to largely manifest value in the form of suggestions, of recommendations. And so there was a company a couple years ago, I can't remember their name, but what they would do is work with your salespeople, and you'd come into the office, and there would be 20 emails prepared for you by the AI based upon your stack and your workflow, and you would go yes, no, and kind of go through. And I think that's going to be a real trend going forward. Is you come in and the AI has found 30 things that things you should look at, and you'll say yes, no, all the way through. Oh, this is a big one. And ideally, it's then learning from that. It's saying, okay, Chris thinks that these sort of network security issues are really important. We're going to make those top of mind. And as such, you've got this sort of ongoing optimization engine underpinning your business. And I think
Yep.
that is really cool. What do you think?
Yes, 100% agree with you. So you actually spoiled a little bit when
Oh,
I'm going
no.
to spoil one of our upcoming releases.
That's
So
funny.
we filed a patent last fall on. I am a big believer in the principles of zero trust at a very high level, right? I think that if we can get organizations to adopt zero trust principles where they're only allowing good network traffic, then you automatically mitigate a significant number of the threats. That's
Interesting.
hard though, right? It's
Right.
hard to go into an environment that doesn't have that defined. Go ask any enterprise or any business anywhere if they understand how their applications work, and they'll tell you no, right?
That's
Right.
funny.
So for me to come in and say, I'm going to put these guardrails in that only allow the things that are supposed to happen, going into a brownfield and doing that is pretty tough. So last fall at reInvent, we launched our first Gen AI feature, which helps make recommendations. We go in, we baseline the environment, we look at all the dependencies for a particular application, we look at every single unique flow, and we say, do we think this one is risky or not, right? We give it kind of a customized category for you. The next release of this is actually going to auto-categorize it with additional context and say, should you allow this flow? Should you deny this flow? Or should you investigate it, right? Bucketing
Wow.
it into a set of, effectively actions that say, our custom recommendations with your application context in terms of how do you evolve in this zero trust environment. So super cool. Again, like we filed a patent on it last fall, and I'm super excited to bring that to the world. Like I think it'll help accelerate zero trust, and it's really enabled by AI.
That's interesting. And you reminded me of another very interesting development that was a discrete service and is extremely powerful. But I think now you are almost kind of nipping around the edges of this, and the topic is process mining, right? So a company Celonis out of Germany is very good. Software AG has some stuff in that space with Aris. And process mining, by and large, what they do is they track the data footprints to show you the actual process of a workflow. A lot of people will think, okay, it's in my ERP, so it's all done in the ERP. No, it's not. The ERP is reaching out to other things like a credit system, for example, or a customer database. So the point is, there's always this sort of de facto path that is taken when you execute something, and being able to visualize that and see it and then optimize that is a really seriously big deal. In fact, I remember they were talking to, like, probably 3 years ago now, when I first learned about Celonis. They said not only can we do process mining, but you can write back to the ERP and change that process. And I was like, oh, you just changed the job of the business process analyst from the loneliest person in the business to the happiest person in the business. Because it used to be they would sit there and like do all this research and studying. Of, okay, I think we should change it like this. And the ops people would say, leave us alone, go away.
Yep,
We're
yep,
busy. Don't break it. Leave us alone. And now that person could change things. And you kind of hinted at that from a security profile, being able to see,
yep.
okay, what is it hitting? That's kind of like process mining, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah. I mean, the term that we use in kind of the network security industry is loosely been called application dependency mapping. I think it's a little bit
Hmm.
like the blind man and the elephant problem, where
Right,
depending on what you want to use it for, you're going to
right.
get a different result. So we look at a very specialized use case for it to help you achieve better internet security posture.
Hmm. Well, because if you understand all the handoffs and that whole sequence of events, then you
Yep.
can start to figure out, maybe if this database gets corrupted, if this file system gets corrupted, aha, that's my red flag. Now I can cordon that off. I mean, just like when they're fixing highways, you put up the construction signs. All right, leave this alone now. We got to reboot this sucker, and you got to go around for now, right? The point is, you get visibility into that environment. And if once you can
Yep.
see where things are going, that's when you can implement controls, and that comes from policies, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean that, and deviation from the norm becomes much more
Right.
interesting,
Right.
right?
Because that's what you're
Uh,
looking for, is something different. Like, what changed in
exactly.
the environment? And then let's investigate that. Is that a problem? I love that you've got these three buckets automation, almost like a sniffer thing out there. It's like, should we
Yep.
accept it? Should we stop it? Should we investigate it? And just have that baked into the runtime, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, runtime security is super, super important. It's one of those, and going back, I was about to say, it's a closed feedback loop. You observe it, you baseline it, you set the policy, and then you enforce the policy. It's like that runtime security piece operates as both the generator of the telemetry for observability, as
Hmm.
well as the enforcer, right?
Hmm.
And making it a closed loop system is really important, because knowing what's different, knowing what's wrong, like that's interesting. But ultimately with cybersecurity, I want to stop it,
Hmm.
right? And the only thing that can actively stop a breach is some security control that is operating in the runtime. And I would argue that there's really only three controls in cybersecurity. There are endpoint agents, what is EDR, XDR, what CrowdStrike largely does. There's network security, which is what traditional firewalls do. And then to some extent, there's identity as well. Like identity is super, super important. But like when I say that, like multi-factor authentication, can I access Outlook and Office 365 and all that kind of stuff. Other than that, though, like those are the runtime security controls. Well, in the cloud, we have a huge problem, because you can't install agents everywhere. They're
Hmm.
platform as a service, right?
Right.
I lost
Right.
my both, again, my visibility and my control point. I oftentimes don't have firewalls because the firewall vendors didn't reinvent their architectures for the cloud. So I don't have my
Right.
network security controls, right?
Right.
So we're scrambling with identity as our own. It should be a three-legged stool. It should be defense and depth. People are
Hmm.
scrambling with identity as the control that they're trying to use. And it's like playing whack-a-mole. And it's really interesting because we've seen huge popularity of cloud security recently. The Wiz acquisition, I mean, like huge, huge acquisition by Google. The thing that I find fascinating about Wiz is it's not runtime security. It's just telling you how to do security hygiene in the cloud. It's like teaching you how to play whack-a-mole,
Hmm.
right? Because you don't have any of those foundational runtime security controls that allow you to stop an attack.
That's a really, really good point. And you also have to be able to play with others, like all others
Yes.
out there, to at least understand what they are and be able to map those and set policies around them, right?
Yep, that's exactly correct. Yeah, security, cybersecurity is a team sport. Ecosystem, super, super important. You have to play the team sport.
That's very interesting. And of course, private cloud is becoming, it seems to be becoming more popular these days. Public cloud. I mean, honestly, I was surprised that it took so long for cloud to really take off. And you've looked just back in the history, AWS wound up getting a 10-year head start on the competition. How the
Yeah,
hell did that happen? I mean, it was
yeah.
10 years later that Microsoft, Satya Nadella, I think, was the one to say, hey, we got to pivot, we got to go cloud. And that's when tens of thousands of small to mid-sized businesses were like, "What's that? Oh, gee, I guess we got to get on that now." Right? I mean, have you seen that too? It's been like 7, 8 years now that we're full
I
on in
mean,
cloud, but it's like, wow, it took a while.
yeah, I would put most of that back on security,
Hmm,
right? I mean, obviously
interesting.
cloud has gotten involved, but like I saw a ton of hesitancy in the early 2010s for organizations to move to the cloud because the cybersecurity team said, no, 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 I don't own that. I don't trust
Right.
it. Don't put your workloads
Right.
out there. But
That's
then what happened was businesses found that the developers could move faster in the cloud and the power dynamic shifted. And they said, okay, like security
interesting.
lost control, like straight up lost control. And now what we're doing is they're trying to play catch up
Interesting.
against the cloud. So yes, I think we're in this really interesting phase of cloud where it's obviously core to multiple businesses strategies, but cybersecurity has been behind, is playing catch up. Environments are incredibly vulnerable. There was a letter from the JP Morgan Chase CISO earlier this week that was talking about how risky current application architectures are and how seriously um, businesses need to take their cybersecurity postures in the cloud because we're in a tough spot right now.
Right.
And ultimately the answer to this is that cyber needs to meet the developers where they are because they're not going to be able to come in and slow them down, not with AI, not with all these advantages
Wow.
to
What
speed.
a
They're going
good
to have to
point.
they're going to have to align.
That's a
And
yeah, that's a really excellent point, and you have to, it's the old Wayne Gretzky line, right? You got to skate to where the puck's going to
yep,
be, and I think from a trajectory perspective, these teams really need to understand, guys, man, you've got to dig deep and shift as far left as you can
yep.
to prevent this, and recognize, like you said, you've got to be in the run time to stop a breach. Well, folks, don't touch that. We'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, Eric Kavanagh with Chris McHenry of Aviatrix. We're talking about cloud network security, and it's interesting. So you made several comments, Chris, that remind me of one of the more fascinating concepts I learned about years ago: opportunity cost. Right? If you're engaged doing one thing, that means you're not doing something else, right? And this is gets to prioritization. And as a CISO, how do you prioritize these days? I mean, obviously you have to understand your stack. Let's say you can't buy any new technology right now. What do you do? There are always the basics, but you start thinking about how powerful these new AI engines are and how good they are at replicating things, how good they are at replicating voice, at replicating face, at replicating all kinds of things about individuals. That is a massive threat to security, right? So what's your advice to CISOs out there who are scratching their heads going, wow, what do I have to do to excel at my job and not wind up on the street?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we've talked about a lot of the pieces to this, so it's kind of fun to bring it all together. This is really one of the big things I was thinking about when I was walking around at RSA is you've got this giant convention, you've got thousands of vendors here talking about a bunch of different things. How in the world am I going to go figure out where I get started?
Right.
And I do think fundamentally, like anyone, understanding your environment first and where your potential risks and gaps might lie is critically important. So observability is number one.
Right.
And you, and then figuring out how to take action after that. But my general advice to people is you could get lost. Like there's so many interesting and exciting new innovations, and it gets people it distracts people from thinking about the fundamental principles. So
Hmm.
for us, right, when we think about it, going back to one of the things we said earlier, that entire industry is there to protect yourself from the internet. You better think about how do you control that boundary between trusted and untrusted networks,
Hmm.
right? How do you control the boundary between things coming in,
Right.
things going out? That
Interesting.
foundational principle, network security, figure out where your holes are. You need to be thinking about foundational elements of um, where my workloads live. Like, are they in the cloud? Are they on premises? You talked about hybrid cloud being one of those examples, right? And I think ultimately, we were chatting about the Wiz acquisition earlier. One of the things that Wiz does really well is it does help you get observability so that you can prioritize and figure out the places that you need to impact first. But ultimately, biggest piece of advice: think about the fundamentals. Runtime security, network security being one of those critical controls.
Yeah. You know what? We had a guest on the show last week who made a really interesting point. He was talking about how versatile the LLMs are, but they're not really good with like telemetry data, for example, or math or
Yeah.
basic things. So then
Yep.
what you do is you tell it to write a Python script to analyze the telemetry data, and that it can do very, very well. So it's like there are
Yeah.
these multi-step processes. It's kind of like cooking. If you go to a really fancy restaurant, what I've learned is that they have figured out ways to cook in stages. So you may cook it in the oven first, and then you stick it on the grill for a second or whatever. You come up with recipes, and let's face it, that's what a lot of the network security stuff has been over the years: playbooks and recipes. Okay, this happened. Take these steps. Well, now Gen AI can track all that stuff for you and give you ideas about how to handle it. And you kind of hinted a minute ago about the value of using whatever observability you get. So if you've got Wiz, good, use the daylights out of that, but don't just use it inside of its own context. Use it outside to be able to pull all the pieces together, because that's what you need. You need to pull all the
Yes.
pieces together to see the big picture every time in network security, right?
Yeah, ultimately you want to put your defense. You could do thousands and thousands of things. You want to get the biggest bang for your buck, right?
Hmm.
So focusing on foundational layers, focusing on full coverage for foundational layers will have a cascading impact on the overall security posture. So yeah, perfect example, right? And sometimes you might get alerts that say like, hey, I've got this vulnerability here. Well, that's great. How do I deal with that? Right? I could patch the vulnerability, but in practicality, if you haven't shifted your entire pipeline left where patching is easy, that could take months, right? Where do
Mm.
I implement compensating controls? Again, at those foundational layers. Do I have runtime agents? Do I have runtime network security? Because those things can ultimately have a much bigger outsized impact on all of the variety of whack-a-mole things that you could play otherwise.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how complex this environment is, but you need to keep a level head, I think,
Yep.
is the first and foremost reason, right? Or mantra. You come into work and like, all right, know you're going to be attacked. Know there are issues going on. I went to the Splunk conference, I guess, about a year and a half ago, and was just looking at some of the screens that these people deal with all day long. And you're like, oh my
Yeah.
goodness. And
Yeah,
and
it's
I,
fun though, right? I mean, like we really do as a society need people to learn more about cybersecurity,
hmm.
right? Those dashboards, that curiosity, right? The understanding, it is the primary battleground in the world right now.
Wow.
And it's an understanding not just of your own environment. It's an understanding of the attacker, the techniques, the motivations, right? One of the first things we oftentimes see when organizations get exploited is that somebody starts mining cryptocurrency. Why? It's the most it's the least
Interesting.
disruptive, most profitable way to monetize an exploit, right?
Wow.
You're least likely to find it because you're not being destructive, and you can stay in there. So you can stay in there for a really long time, and you can make a lot of money out of it.
Right.
Ransomware, you actually, you got to do a lot of work. Like, you get in there, you initiate the ransom, then you got to figure out how to collect the ransom. You got to figure out how to get away with it, right? If
Right.
I mine crypto, then it's a lot easier. But again, that's motivation, right? Understand the motivation of the attacker, understand the techniques of the attacker. If you think about, I'm a huge fan of this concept, both the MITRE attack matrix and the Lockheed Martin kill chain, because
Mm,
both of those focus on exploits from the perspective of the attacker. And if you understand the perspective of the attacker, you can say, oh, I want to stop things earlier in the chain,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
Those are the foundational layers. Get somebody before they get in. And again, we need more people to get curious about that. We need more people to be trained about it. Improving, because when I look at those dashboards, I think, yep, overwhelming, but also fascinating. Like,
Yeah,
what is interesting about this?
sure. No, I agree. And the cool thing now is you can use Gen AI to inform yourself about this. And if you bake some of those engines in, again, always take it with a grain of salt. They are probabilistic engines, but the finer grain they get tuned on your environment, the better they're going to be at explaining what just happened. What does it mean when this light goes off and that light comes on, kind of stuff? It's like, it'll tell you.
Yep.
And it's like, that's a whole different world. I mean, you used to have to go to talk to someone else to do that. We'd had internet portals, we've had all kinds of things, playbooks, like I mentioned earlier, but a playbook is pretty static. Whereas the
Yes.
LLMs can be very dynamic and can adjust to what's happening in real time. And that is a huge game changer, right?
Yeah. Agentic workflows are super interesting. Kind of closing out, we're coming up on the end of time, but the one of the integrations we announced at RSA was with Microsoft's Security Copilot stack, and they've been really driving innovation in observability to some extent. They've got a really healthy stack with Microsoft Sentinel that's an alternative to Splunk and some of the other SIM products out there. But where they're really innovating is in this Gen AI space, right? Combining that expertise that they have with OpenAI and the cybersecurity workflows. And so we were a launch partner with them for their new agentic frameworks with Microsoft Security Copilot, kind of like MCP, allows you to reach out to Aviatrix, gather telemetry, take action, do a bunch of other things. But where we really started with this was the idea of, can I automate a runbook? And lots of different places you can go, but one of the common use cases that customers use Aviatrix for is this concept around secure connectivity to their business partners. It's not just the internet,
Hmm.
it's really any place where you have an untrusted connection. Business partners, oftentimes, like if I am a large bank, I need to process a transaction. Maybe I've got a relationship with Visa and Amex and different credit card payment process. I probably have a VPN connection to them. If that VPN connection goes down, then I'm losing business. So
Mm.
it's both a high security connection and has a huge uptime requirement associated
Right,
with it. So
right,
that process of restoring that VPN connection, highly manual. You got to go in, you got to do a bunch of troubleshooting, you got to look at logs, you got to call the other company to see if they made any changes on their side.
right,
And then you get on a
right.
phone call, you try to fix it. The agentic workflow has an understanding of Aviatrix. It makes troubleshooting decisions in real time, looks at when those things are down and tries to auto repair it to reduce MTTR, right? Really
Wow,
interesting use case.
wow.
And it goes back to that idea of how can I automate a runbook in a more intelligent way?
Right. Mean time to resolution, right?
Yeah, yeah,
MTTR. Like, how fast can we fix this stuff? It's like we lost a bunch of power here in the Pittsburgh area because a nasty storm came through, and like like literally 80% of the town was out of power for a day. And then some people were out for like 2 days and 3 days. So what's that mean time to resolution? It's like
yep,
2.5 days. That's a long time in enterprise
yeah.
security, folks. Well, don't touch that dial, folks. So you're listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis. Great conversation today with Chris McHenry of Aviatrix. And Chris, I was thinking to myself, the thing about security is that it's sort of insidious because there's always something happening and you never really know when you find it. Sometimes you're like, yay, I found it, I stopped the bad guy. And you have to have a certain psyche to face that dragon every single day, knowing because like in the creative world, I'll write an article. I'm like, oh, I did something. I feel good about myself. I do a show. I did feel good about myself. How do you keep motivated day to day? How do you keep your teams motivated? I mean, do you look for metrics like, okay, MTTR is down or something like what are the sort of motivational milestones that you want to see and how do you keep that morale up like day after day, week after week, month after month?
It's a really good question. I think metrics are important, and finding ways to make incremental progress over time is really, really important. I'm a huge I mentioned this earlier. I'll give you one example. I'm a huge believer in zero trust as a principle. I think as we evolve network security postures to be less about detecting bad things and more about allowing good things,
Oh,
you're not constantly chasing
that's good.
anymore, right? So one of the things, again, introduced in our product, don't always talk about things we introduce, but these are really good questions, right? Introduced in our product last fall was a scoring system that allows you to track your progress along your zero trust journey. It
Hmm.
says, and so you can get feedback incrementally as you're making an impact in the environment. And the key with zero trust is that it's a lasting impact. It's not a transient impact. It's not I stopped this one thing today. It's I'm making a meaningful improvement in our defensive capabilities in the long term, right? So moving that dial up, I think, is a really great way of keeping the morale up. I will say the other piece, you're right on this being a particular type of person that gets excited about this. Um, Curiosity, being a problem solver.
Right.
There's a lot of clever things that are happening from an adversarial perspective, and so you have to understand those to be able to respond uh, appropriately. You will learn a lot about a lot of things. You're going to understand a lot of different types of IT systems and risks. But then the last, so that's motivating. But then the last thing, I think this is really one of the most important pieces is the best cybersecurity professionals that I know are mission oriented.
Hmm.
And I think that there is work is a really interesting part of life. I do think that if you can find something that fulfills you, that has a strong mission, you're going to be a lot more motivated to continue on, even when things are challenging, because work is
Hmm.
challenging. I don't
That's
know, for me, of a mission that would motivate me more than being able to solve one of the fundamental cybersecurity problems in the world. It's going to be
yeah.
good for everybody.
Yeah.
And if I can, apps are moving to the cloud. They are, the thing that runs many businesses, many organizations, the world to some extent. You mentioned we're all using the internet. If I can make the internet a safer place by reinventing network security in the cloud, that's a pretty strong mission, right? And keeps you motivated even when things are challenging.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And we all see these phishing scams. They're getting very sophisticated these days. I mean, I've gotten, there was one a couple years ago that has gotten better and better, and you learn to watch for them. But it was like a Verizon thing. Your Verizon bill this month is $1,479. I was like, what? Like, wait a minute, like that's
Yep.
a phishing scam. Don't click on that link. But to your point, the further you can go upstream into the clouds, into Azure, into the Google Cloud Platform, Rackspace, all these guys. Like if we can, defense in depth. You said it yourself. I got a military friend. He talks a lot about that. Defense in depth. It's not just one thing. Security is never just one thing. It's a whole array of tools, technologies, processes, workflows, people, training, all that stuff. And it's not that one person. I joked at the top of the hour, the person named Scapegoat who's responsible for security. That is no bueno. You cannot take that
Yep.
approach. It's everyone's responsibility. And so just get everyone's skin in the game, if at least a little bit, just remind them of things. It's no one wants to talk about security all day long except security people, but we cannot have this be isolated as some sort of separate part of the operation. Security and governance and risk management are baked in all around us for every workflow all the time, right, Chris?
Yes, absolutely. It should be entrenched in the psyche of an organization.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. It's a mindset. It is a mindset, and you have to keep it in the back of your mind and be interested and understand what's happening. Because the more you understand, the better you're going to job protecting your environment. Final thoughts from you, Chris.
Yeah, I mean that's obviously what we're really passionate about. I think it is, you got to invest in it, right? Don't ignore it. I
Hmm.
definitely, it is sometimes an overwhelming problem, and being able to take incremental steps towards improving your posture really, really important. Our goal from a cybersecurity product perspective is to give you the biggest impact with the lowest effort, so that you can move yourself forward on that scale of protection. But you got to invest in it and prioritize it.
Yep, that sounds good. Well, look these folks up online. Chris McHenry, Aviatrix, Aviatrix. Like I said, it's a female pilot. Very cool stuff, helping us all stay safe in the world of interconnected reality. That's the world we live in, folks. We'll talk to you next time. You've been listening to Inside Analysis.